Power work can be specific and probably should be specific at some point, but strength work is general because the main purpose of strength work for an athlete is simply to increase the capacity of the nervous system to send a strong activation drive to the muscles. That's all it is. It's just to be able for that central machine to send a signal, whatever that signal is, okay? So you don't need to have a movement that is very specific to be effective for sport. And that's why some people will benefit from strength work if they have an inefficient nervous system, while others won't if they already have that very efficient central drive.
That was Christian Thibaudeau, and you're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today's podcast is brought to you by Simply Faster. Simply Faster is an online sports technology store that curates the best of in various elements of training, such as timing systems with the Freelap timing system, training tools with things such as blood flow restriction training and the K-Box, athlete monitoring devices such as velocity-based training, force plates, and the VO2 Master, and much more. I choose sponsors for this show that I use their products personally, and I have been loving using blood flow restriction training this past year. The Freelap timing system has been an absolute staple for me. I've really enjoyed using bar speed tracking and the K-Box. Those and other products in their store have been a really valuable part of not just my coaching journey, but also my journey as an athlete. They have as well an amazing blog on sports performance and are a top-notch company with great customer service. Be sure to check them out, and you can do that at simplyfaster.com. That's simply with an I, faster.com. Welcome to another episode of the podcast, and thanks for being here. Our guest today is none other than Coach Christian Thibaudeau. Really excited to have him back on the show. Christian is a prolific author and writer in the strength and performance industry. He's the originator of the neuro-typing training system, the omni-contraction training system, and I have taken many pages of notes from our conversations through the course of this show. Last episode Christian was on, he went in depth on power complexes and training, specifically on the adrenaline cost of using a lot of exercises in a power training complex, a power training complex being using multiple different exercises in a single training circuit. So heavy squats, jump squats, depth jumps, all in one training circuit. And he talked about when to use power complexes and when to see if athletes could get their gains and transfer gains into the field without the use of complexes. Was a really fascinating conversation. And this talk builds on that. Christian will get into the relationship of strength and power and the specific nuances of each. In this show, he'll be getting into some nuts and bolts of the Gunthor training complex used by a shot put champion, Werner Gunthor, back in the 80s. He's going to be talking about progressing complexes in terms of sensitivity and resensitivity. This is just a great show that builds on the idea of complexes and furthers our knowledge in the realm of the role of strength and then the role of power complexes in that athlete training program. It's always great to talk to Christian. Love having him on the show, and I'm excited to get you guys this episode. Let's get on to it. Christian, awesome to have you back on the show. There's so much I want to chat with you about today, and yeah, thanks for being here, man. I'm excited for our conversation.
Well, it's always a nice chat with you because I really enjoy like the pure performance talk. I don't get to do that a lot these times, so it's always like a dessert for me to talk with you.
Yeah, I know we'll have a lot to cover, and this might end up being a little bit shorter. I know we're both on a little bit of a time limit here today. So sometimes it's a little bit different when you don't just have, 2 hours for sure, but I'm excited to get whatever I can with you here. So we'll get right to it. The podcast you just had with Pat Davidson was an amazing, just training nuts and bolts and philosophy talk. And it was really cool listening to that. And you said something in the midst of that it got my wheels turning. And I think this becomes more and more and more relevant the older you get. I think people who train high schoolers, especially high schoolers these days, sadly, who don't get enough variety in their sport play. But I tend to train, I don't have enough variability in my own training, I think, at age 39 here. I love speed and power and sprints and the lifts. But you mentioned a friend of yours who's, I think, in his mid-50s and in incredible shape, and there was a seasonality to how he trains. So I'd love if you could start with that story to kick us off.
Yeah, it's actually wrote an article or even a series of articles about that. And he's a guy I used to coach with in football. He's also a physical education teacher there and a strength coach. And he is in literally the same physical condition at like 55 now than he was when we were training in the same gym together when he was like 35 or 37. And he does something weird that's probably anti-conventional because it goes against the grain in that he divides his training in 4 different periods, which are completely like different mesocycles. There will be some carryover from one to the other, but it's really like a separate season completely, like if he was preparing for a different sport. So, for example, he will have in the winter, he would have more of a powerlifting approach, for example. Well, autumn, it would be more bodybuilding. Then he would go into winter, it would be more powerlifting. Then he would go into autumn and he would train like an Olympic weightlifter. And in the summer, he would train like a track and field athlete. And each period would obviously last roughly 12 weeks because of the yearly calendar. And each would be its own periodized 3-phase or 3 blocks, whatever you want to call it, cycle. So it's a full peaking cycle for bodybuilding, for without the fat loss aspect, just pure hypertrophy. Like the powerlifting phase will be a lead up as if you were competing in powerlifting. Same thing with weightlifting, although he sticks with the power variations of the Olympic lifts, not the full squat variations. And then he would move on to more of the track and field training, which will actually combine elements of the powerlifting and the weightlifting portion on top of obviously the plyometrics and stuff like that.
Yeah, me.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah, no worries. Did you have anything else that you were going to say?
I was just going to mention that one thing that it's very recently I understood, like one of the main physiological benefits of that approach, because strictly from a physical capacities perspective, I can understand it because, for example, the hypertrophy phase will build a muscle mass you can use for powerlifting. Powerlifting will build a strength that might help you build power. Although I have changed my view a bit on the impact of strength work on power development. We often say that it's the foundation of power, but I think the role of strength in power development is overstated. And I'm not saying it's not important, but it's not as important as we once thought, and not for everyone. Anyway, so that's the way we used to think about it. And obviously the weightlifting, which is higher speed, is a nice bridge into the track and field work. But also is that the body becomes desensitized to a certain training stimulus. If you keep giving it that same stimulus for a long while, you might change exercises, you might change volume. But if the type of stimulation and the required adaptations are the same, then each session or each passing week, the stimulus becomes less and less effective. Now, that's the role of periodization. To keep progressing, you need to increase the strength of a stimulus as the body becomes desensitized to it, right? But at one point, there's no way to increase the strength of the stimulus without overtraining. So that's where you need to either change direction completely, which is what my friend does, or include a maintenance phase with a dramatically decreased volume, probably 1/3 of what you were doing to resensitize your body. You can even go like 2 weeks without training at all. So what I think worked so well and that allowed him continuous progress, even as he was getting older, was that resensitization effect. So he would basically stop each block once he has peaked and probably can't increase the strength of the stimulus anymore. Then he would change the type of training completely. Now the body is sensitive to the new type of stress. So he would start a cycle with lower volume and just increase lower training stress. He would gradually increase the training stress to compensate for the gradual down regulation. And then once the body was tapped out, then he would change quality again or change focus again, and the body would be receptive again. Now, that's probably not the best way to train if you need to specialize in one type of development. But if you want overall physical conditioning, be in great shape, be powerful, be strong, and if you like stimulus variation, like for example, myself, I need variation in my training, and I need my training to be goal-oriented. When I was younger, because of my self-image issues, just getting stronger or more muscular was sufficient for me. But I find that the more, and I don't like to say this, but the more successful I am from a professional standpoint and with my family and stuff like that, the less I need external validation, right? So my training motivation now is gone because it used to be to earn respect of other, right? Now I don't need that. So I need to have very specific goals. For example, 2 years ago, my goal was to squat 500 again. So my training was solely focused on that. Then it was to improve my golf swing. And I took my golf swing from 112 miles an hour to 133. So then my goal was achieved. Now it's to get my incline bench press strong again. So I always need a rabbit to chase. And that division, that periodization is something I instinctively do. I don't do it as structured as my friend, but I find that to me, it's the best way to progress.
Yeah, I like what you said there. And I think a lot of us, it's like especially you think about when teenage boys start lifting, there's part of that is a rite of passage almost, like into adulthood. But then there is also, that comes with that, a lot of validation. If I look this way, then people will respect me. If I look, it's like this covering over. Not to say I think that it's great I think it's great for young adults, young males to lift for a lot of reasons. But I think what's never covered within that is some of the validating reasons. And like you said, once we get a little bit older and we start sorting that out for whatever way, it almost frees us up a little bit, to not necessarily have to look a certain way. Maybe we play a little bit more instead. We do something that we do just for the sake of doing it. That's just more fun. And I'm even still getting more, giving myself permission to do things that are just fun for the sake of doing them, rather than, for me, my validation, a lot of it has been, well, how high can I jump? How fast can I run? How much do I know about those things? And just to give myself some release from that, for even just some time where that doesn't matter, just to do it for the sake of doing it, like rock climbing or breakdancing or things that are, just more movement. So sorry, I just, that definitely resonates with me as you get older.
It's funny you mention that because even myself, even with my workouts, I actually had to make a post about that and mention it in one of my live Q&As because people will always want to know how I train. And I say, well, the thing is that a lot of the stuff I'm doing is not optimal for improvement. I do it for two reasons. First, because at this point in my life, I'm trying, yes, to achieve a goal, and that's going to be the overarching principle, but I do a lot of stuff simply because I want to do them and I just enjoy doing them. For example, I like to train every day, which is something I would never recommend to anybody. Okay. But me, I like it. It just fits into my circadian rhythm. It sets my body properly. It gets me in a good mood, but it's not something I would recommend. So I do lots of stuff because I want to do it, because I'm at a point in my life. I don't feel the urge to be the best anymore in the gym. And the second reason is I still feel the need to experiment. And you can't experiment without trying stuff, and maybe some stuff is not going to work. So if I write what I'm doing and I haven't figured out yet if that's a good method, you might actually be doing something that's not going to be effective. That's how I work. I mean, a lot of people will only follow the research. Well, I'll follow what's happening in the trenches. And you look at old-time strongmen and guys like that, before the internet, before magazines, they basically learn by trying stuff. Something it was crazy and didn't work. Sometimes it turned out to be great methods. And that's what I'm trying to do. And that's just fun. I mean, the one thing I hate with the current trend in the evidence-based crew is that it took all the fun into discovery.
Yes. Oh, I couldn't agree more.
Very bland. Yeah.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. That's the thing is, Hank Kreinoff, who's been on the show, has said a lot of times it's you come up with something by having fun, letting intuition hit you, and then research will validate it 25 years later, And I will say that the paradox almost of that, seasonality, being able to take a break to do something else the paradox is when you do take a break, you end up better in the long term. I know that it was last summer, so 2021, July, I went to this Return to the Source, Rafe Kelly's big retreat. It was parkour in the woods and tons of that. And after that retreat, the thought hit me, I need to take, as much as I love sprinting and jumping, and honestly, I could sprint and jump I love it enough that I could do it year round. But I'm just going to take a break and skateboard for 3 weeks and not do a whole lot else. And I'm just going to do this because it's fun and it's new and I'm going to improve. And people say some stuff with foot strength and I've talked about that on the podcast, but doing that actually set me up to this past summer. I made the decision, all right, I'm only going to time flying 10s in the summer. Cause your friend who did the sprints in the summer, I'm and maybe I'll sprint all year, but I'm only going to make a big deal of this and time the 10s in the summer, and that's my season. And that also kind of gives you a thing where like, hey, this is your chance. It gives you that urgency of this is your season for this. You don't get all year. And then you got to do something else. Like, and then I'm making my winter more strength oriented. And so and I kind of have to, I feel like I almost need like a challenge too. That's the epitome of that. Maybe I need to do like some bouldering competitions, or there should be a competition associated with this thing you're doing too, versus, I don't know, that's at least where I'm kind of going with that. So
yeah, absolutely. No, I agree with that, especially if you don't have the burden of peaking for an actual competition. But even then, you know what? And that's one thing that separates, I think, the very, very high level athletes and the wannabes, and those who are less confident about their capacities. You will have guys who are at the very top of the pyramid. In their mind, there's no problem taking like 4 months off from training because they know they got it, right? I was reminded like Ilya Ilin, Olympic weightlifter, because I used to follow him because I really love his technique. And he was like world champion, and he took like a full year off, no lifting at all. Like he was actually doing lots of dancing and probably some bodybuilding stuff, I guess, on the side. But and when he got back to training, I was looking at his weights. Dude, I can almost do the weights he's doing. But you know what? 3 months later, he was winning the world championship with weights way above what he ever lifted. Liu Jiajun is doing the same thing this year. He started out like taking almost like the whole year off because of pandemic and other reasons, and he was posting videos when he was getting back to training, and he was failing 80 kilos on a snatch, whereas his best was like 166, and he lost all muscle mass. But then again, you know what? Right now he's doing pretty much what he was doing in his competition days, and he's preparing for the world championships again. So the best actually probably are the best in large part because of that. Because the motor patterning is so ingrained that they can take some time off and it won't affect them. And the physiology will come back very quickly. And probably their body now is more responsive than it was had they not stopped training. But they're progressing faster because they're regaining a lot of those capacities with enhanced sensitivity. So they can actually reach a higher level than they did when they were competing before their break.
Yeah, something you had said on Pat's podcast that I thought was really interesting was that something to the tune that overtraining is not, I mean, I'm sure there is some muscle damage stuff and all that, but it's more that you desensitize to whatever you're doing.
Absolutely.
And I think we tend to think, overtraining is, you're maybe your testosterone to cortisol, and maybe it is bad, but why is it bad? Is it because you like really damaged your body? Are your muscles like all ripped up on the inside? Or is it just, did it start in the brain the same way fatigue starts in the mind? Does overtraining actually start in the mind before the body?
It's brain and hormonal. I mean, the muscle damage, and don't get me wrong, there is such a thing as peripheral fatigue leading to a decrease in performance because of muscle damage. So basically what happens when you're training hard and your muscles are firing hard, you will release calcium ions. And that calcium ion buildup is what causes muscle damage. It's actually not the muscle being torn apart. It's really the calcium ions. So that muscle damage, if it's not fixed before your next session, for example, it will have a negative impact on performance because the tissue itself, it becomes less responsive to the neural drive because of the inflammation, because of free radicals, because of different in the acidity milieu of the muscle. So the muscle becomes less receptive, and yes, you have a decrease in performance. But muscle damage is fixed pretty quickly. I mean, even if you reach a level, the most severe case of muscle damage hindering performance I've seen lasted 21 days, which is very long, very, very, very long. But then again, that still subsided after 21 days, and it was the most severe case I've ever seen. Like hardcore overtraining mostly has to do with the overproduction of adrenaline and cortisol. So essentially, when you're training, you increase cortisol to increase adrenaline production, to increase mental awareness, mental focus, competitiveness. And obviously, the more pressure you put on yourself to perform, the greater the cortisol response, because you need that higher adrenaline level to be amped up, right? That's why a competition, even though there's very little volume compared to what you do in training, is a lot more damaging from a recovery standpoint, because the adrenaline is so high that it desensitizes the beta adrenergic receptors at the muscle, heart, and brain level. So all these three will become less efficient because they stop responding to your own adrenaline. So at the muscle side, it decreases force production, speed of contraction, muscle tone. So that muscle tone is one of the first symptoms of desensitization, quote unquote, overtraining. At the cardiac level, well, if your heart doesn't respond well to adrenaline, it can't contract as hard, can't contract as fast. So endurance goes down, as well as clearing out the metabolites produced in the muscle when you do like lactic work, for example. So you perform bad in those activities also. And from a brain perspective, if your adrenergic receptors are become downregulated, then your speed of thought decreases, your motivation decreases, your competitiveness has decreased, you have negative thoughts. And then there's a whole cascade because excessive adrenaline production, if it's sustained, will lead to a depletion of other neurotransmitters like noradrenaline, like dopamine. Then now you have no pleasure in life, everything is dark, everything is bad. So it's really mostly in neurotransmitter, the brain, and it's also hormonal. The tissue itself can withstand a lot of work and can recover really quickly.
Yeah, so it's almost like the tissue is almost like the last link in the chain to go. It starts in like the neurotransmitters, the brain, and the hormonal system, and it makes me think too that like what's in the brain is in the body. It's in the hormonal system at least. Like you're going to see that symbiosis. I guess the question is on level like where did it start? Did it start because an athlete like started to mentally get like, all right, this is boring, and now the body starts to take on those characteristics? I mean, I guess that's probably minutia, and that's something that
no, it's important to understand it when you're working with advanced athletes, and I think there is such a thing as people. Well, and we know there's such a thing that people respond better to stress. So some people will actually need the stress to perform well. And these people probably are less likely to suffer from downregulation. Whereas those who constantly need to like try to amp themselves up because they can never like be in the zone, then it's asking a lot of their body. If you're someone who needs to psych yourself up to train, then you're a type of person who will crash very easily. So it's somewhat complex, but personality has a role in how easily you can overtrain the neurotransmitter and hormonal systems.
Yeah, I have a little follow up with that, and I did want to circle back to what you mentioned about the speed and strength link. But I want to ask this before I forget, as you mentioned, you like yourself doing high frequency training, and that was one thing I wanted to, and I do want to get to the complexes too. Hopefully we have time. But this is something I've noticed with myself as I've really taken to high frequency training. I started out with very much to be in the mindset, maybe more like you have West Side, right? You have a strength day and a dynamic day. You're only training hard per body part like 2 days a week. You could do the same thing with speed training. Maybe I'm going to sprint hard twice a week or 3 times a week, and the other days are easy. I found this in my 20s that I responded way better to high frequency work for the most part, but then inevitably I would kind of get burnt out after so many blocks of that because it just squeezed so much performance out of me, and then I'd have to like deload because it's almost. I don't know. Part of it is, did the high frequency allow me to build like solid structures in my body, or was that just expressing what I already had, or probably a combination of the two, I would say. But I find now, and this is what I wanted to ask you, and you could feel free to chime in on any of what I just said, but nowadays, if I go after being so used to a high frequency model, and I genuinely enjoy the training I do, I'm not really belabored to go out and train, some days more than others, but if I go now to a low frequency, if I just go down to 2 days a week, I have a hard time with that. Like I really genuinely have a hard time. And so I'm just curious what your take is on like alternating between those two. Once you expose someone to a higher frequency model that could get more out of them, and alternating between a lower frequency and a higher frequency.
I think it depends a lot on, because we need to understand that like the training itself can, especially if it becomes like a daily thing, will have an impact on circadian rhythms. It's like an external signal that can trigger, especially if you train at the same time, always at the same time. So for example, if you train in the morning, it can actually be part of your wake cycle. So it actually can contribute to putting you in that sympathetic mode that you need during your day. So it actually puts you in a better mindset, right? So that can actually help you have a more regular circadian rhythm, which tend to be pretty irregular because of our lifestyle and modern like go lifestyle. So that's part of it. So when you remove that, you're removing one of the main signals that trigger your day or circadian rhythm. It's kind of like we say that ideally you would wake up and the first thing you do is look at sunlight. And similarly, when you go to bed, if you have a hard time like relaxing in the evening, watching the sky, the moon, the stars at night also triggers the parasympathetic system, will increase melatonin production. So it can put you in that rest and recover mode. So these are external signs that can help you regulate your biorhythm or your circadian rhythm. And training can actually become part of that equation if you do it often. Same thing could be using like red light therapy in the morning, for example. Okay. But once you remove those stimulus, it's like there's something missing, especially if you get your body used to using those signals to like regulate your daily calendar. See what I mean? Your daily schedule. So that's part of it. And there's obviously the neurological activation aspect, which I kind of mentioned, which also plays a role. Then there are many hormonal impact, like cortisol will increase adrenaline when you're training. So that, and there will be a release in dopamine. There will be endorphins if you do more of an energy system session. So there's lots of good stuff happening that puts you in a better mood, better mindset. And when you take that out, it's kind of like a withdrawal syndrome, right? So if you never feel that, if you train like one day on, one day off, for example, you never build up that need. So, but if you train frequently, then you actually need that. It becomes a part of your drug regimen, if you want to call it that your body needs. Now, the thing is that, yeah, you can burn out. It really becomes a matter of properly regulating volume and intensity. And I find that you actually need, and especially for performance, you should use a much, much lower daily volume than you think you need. And that's been my greatest finding and change. Because when I was training mostly for like hypertrophy, using like low demands exercises, maybe more machine work, maybe more single joint movement, not going super heavy, then yeah, you can maintain a pretty high volume, and that's fine because the muscle itself recovers pretty easily. But the moment you start focusing on neurological work, then you actually don't need a strong stimulus to get adaptations. And especially if you have a very efficient nervous system. So personally, what I find is I probably go like half the volume of what I think I need when I'm using a high frequency approach. And if you go with a lower frequency approach, then you need to increase volume. Like a friend of mine had a good analogy when it comes to diet. If you have one meal a day, it has to be one freaking big meal, right? If you're eating 3 meals a day, it has to be moderate meals. If you're eating 6 times a day, it has to be small meals. Same thing with training. And the same thing applies. And it applies not just to volume, but to the training stress. The higher or the more effective the training methods are, the less volume you do. And that would be the benefit of those higher effectiveness methods, like complexes, for example. Like right now, what I'm doing is I am focusing on mostly my incline bench press because I do need a goal. I still train the snatch grip high pull. I still train the squat, but at a lower frequency. But I will train the incline bench press 6 days a week. But only 2 of those days are high demand. And these would be my complex workouts. And I would use a Werner Gunthor complex, which is extremely stimulating because you have actually modified it quite a bit. So you have the first layer would be like a super maximal eccentric. So you have like 105% on eccentric, 80% on the concentric for 1 rep. Then my second step would be 90% eccentric, 60% concentric for 6 reps. Then I have statodynamic. So it's going to be a pause like 3 inches from the chest and then explode from that position with 70% for 6 reps. Then I would have a pure isometrics for 30 seconds in that same position with 60%. Then I would have max explosion rep with 60%. So that would be very hefty complex, very high stimulus, but I do it once. I do 1 complex per workout. I started at 2 workouts because I need to build up my sets to get to the heavyweight first anyway. So that was already some volume in there. I started twice and I just couldn't recover from it. I dropped down to doing the complex once. And I'm literally adding 15 to 20 pounds per week since I started doing that. And the other days when I do the incline, it's like just strength skill. So like 3 sets of 3 reps with 80%, just focusing on technique, because when you go heavy work and explosive, sometimes the technique will break down. And the rest of the exercises, the volume is also low. So my total training time per session is probably like 30, 35 minutes. So a lot less than I thought I need. So complexes, for example, if obviously the more exercises you have in a complex, the less volume you should do. The problem is people will look at a typical complex, let's say a Russian complex where you have a squat and a jump squat, for example. So you have a squat, let's say 3 reps at 85%, 2 minutes rest. Then you have 5 trap bar jumps at 10% of your max squat, for example. You might do that 3 or 4 sets with, because you only have 2 exercises. But if you do the same 4 rounds for a complex with 4 exercises, you literally have a humongous volume of a lot of different stimuli. And the more different stimuli you have together, the harder the nervous system needs to work. Because even though the movement pattern are quite similar, you're not using the same contraction style, contraction speed. It's a different motor task. So with every set, your brain has to program a new motor pattern, which is very hard to do. So you produce even more adrenaline because you need more brain power. So your neuron needs to fire faster, and adrenaline makes your neuron fire faster. So the more complex a complex is, the more exercises there is, the greater the neurological load of that complex. So the less work you should be doing. So that's the problem. A lot of people, the complex are my favorite performance method of all time, but people overdo them. And I used to overdo them also because I worked with athletes who were on the resistance spectrum. And that's something you need to realize. Like, if you're reading or listening to a strength coach, okay, what was or what is their typical clientele? For example, Charles Poliquin, okay, is use of cluster training. Is a Poliquin cluster, use your 3RM, so let's say 92%, 90%, which you do for 5 reps with 15 seconds in between. Give that to a strong athlete or a fast switch dominant athlete. There's no way he can do it. No way. He will actually do less reps than he would normally do at that load with straight sets. Because for him, that 15 seconds period is not enough to recover. A strong athlete, a high fast switch fiber athlete would need 30, 40, 45 seconds between reps to get the cluster effect. Okay. But that worked with Charles because he was working mostly with hockey players, especially back then. And even nowadays, hockey players are on the low end of strength and on the high end of recovery because they train in a lactic zone pretty much all the time. So they have very good resistance. They recover really quickly, but they don't have the strength to create a lot of fatigue on each rep. If you give that to an Olympic weightlifter, it won't work as well. So I work a lot with hockey players also, which can tolerate a humongous amount of volume. So I use like 2 complexes per workout, but that's too much. Most people should stick with 1 complex and do a lot less than they think. And if there's one message that people should remember is, especially with high frequency training, do a lot less than you think you need. Because if you're training every day, the stimulus will pile up anyway.
Quickly, I wanted to let you know about the chance to try out Performance Herbalism for only a few dollars shipping costs and get one of Lost Empire Herb's flagship products, Pine Pollen, for free. Switching to an herbal emphasis in my supplementation has been a life-changing switch for me. Just as nature is by design balanced and sustainable, I believe that the more natural our diet and our supplementation is, the better. I love and use several Lost Empire Herbs products that boost not only my energy, but also my strength. These include Shilajit resin and the Phoenix formula. You can check those out by heading to lostempireherbs.com/justfly and grab 15% off. If you're on the fence about the power of herbalism, I have a great offer for you, which is that you can get free pine pollen. Pine pollen is an herbal powerhouse that is a hormonal and energy booster packed with nutrition. It's actually part of the Phoenix formula. And you can get that for free along with the normal shipping fee at justflypinepollen.com. All right, let's get back to the show.
Yeah. As I've gotten into my late 30s, I've learned that pretty substantially. I even had it to the point where, I would just be doing
just a couple sets of whatever the main thing was, the main high intensity thing on that day, and then just surround it with a lot of more recovery based or isometric, like easier, not overcoming, but easier isometrics and all that stuff. And that seemed to be really helpful. It reminds me, and what you said with that, the Gunthor complex, I think it was, which I'd love to get into that and some more of the complexes you use, into the nuts and bolts. But it was Bobby Stroop who talked about just using like one round of French contrast and that's it. And that was like, I was like, I mean, I won't say it's totally mind blowing because I had done 2 and I thought that was like revolutionary. Back when I was at Cal, I was working with the teams. It's like, all right, we're just going to do 2. And I'm like, and then Bobby's like 1. I'm like, whoa, 1. But I'm like, that makes perfect sense. Like, because if you do it well and it's a complex, like you said, it's like more, it's almost like we're so hung up on we got to do 3 or 4 sets of whatever we're doing mentality. I just thought that was so brilliant with Bobby just doing that. And there's such a sense of urgency to it as well. Like if you're just doing 1 or 2 of something, it does make it a little bit more special. And yeah, maybe you don't get the warm up, but that Gunthor, I mean, the complex sounds gnarly too. I use the Gunthor complex even more than French contrast.
You still do warm ups before.
Yeah.
So it's not like you're not getting work done. And that's the particularity of warming up for performance training versus warming up for bodybuilding. Like a warming up for bodybuilding does not contribute to hypertrophy because you're doing your sets that will be like 5, 6, 7 reps short of failure, which means that none of the reps are actually contributing to muscle growth. But for performance, if your intent is to accelerate the weight, even during your earlier sets, which maybe you need 1 or 2 rounds just to practice the movement to get in the groove, if you have an intent to be explosive, even though you're using submaximal loads, or even if you're just going at 80% effort, you still have a training effect. So it's not like it does not contribute. It's not like you're doing like just 1 set. All the previous work you're doing will contribute to your performance improvement.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, you're not just going to step in and just, load overloaded eccentric on the bar and just hit the first set. I mean, you're clearly going to ramp up to that. Now, when you, or maybe just crazy one day and just do it that way. But now with that though, when you say 1 set, is that now when you would like warm up for that, for example, that Gunthor complex, are you warming up with a few, like just some, like a squatting ramp up and then you hit that complex, or do you warm up with submaximal sets of the complex and then hit it hard one time? Could you just go into that if you're just going to do like 1 set of the complex?
The Gunthor complex, I only need to warm up 1 exercise because there is no plyometrics. So for example, if I had a squat and a plyometric exercise, I would need to warm up both. Because, and that's the thing, and that's, by the way, I'm just gonna like sig into like what I mentioned about strength not being as important as we thought for power, although it's not unimportant, is that the recruitment pattern during a fast action and during a slow, strong action is completely different from a muscle recruitment perspective. And that means that you can be really, really efficient at one type and not have the same efficiency as the other one. So you might be really efficient in the slow movements, which is monophasic when it comes to muscle recruitment. So you recruit all the agonist and synergistic muscle, and they stay turned on for the whole rep or for the whole movement, and you have a background co-activation of the antagonist to create stability, right? And the more technically efficient you are, the less of that co-activation you have, so the prime movers have less resistance. Now, in explosive movement, you have a triphasic structure to muscle activation. So the agonist and synergistic muscles start by firing really, really hard without co-activation of the antagonist. And then you will have a peak in antagonistic muscle activation, kind of to stabilize the movement once momentum has been created. And then there's a second peak of agonist and synergistic activation with a decrease in antagonist recruitment. I'll show you the curve. It's easier visual to see. But the point is that neurologically speaking, the brain does not recruit muscles the same way in fast and slow movements. And the difference is even greater when you have several muscles involved in a movement. So that's why powerlifters who squat 1,000 pounds are not necessarily fast sprinters, right? Even the lean powerlifters who, like in the lower class, like 181, who squat 800 pounds, are not going to run a sub 11 second 100 meters, except for some rare exceptions, right? You can be really efficient at one, but not efficient at the other one, okay? So when you're warming up, if you have a plyometric exercise, a jump exercise, Olympic lift, you need to warm up separately, not just like, I'm going to do my strength lift and I'm going to be automatic. So you need both. But in a Werner Gunthor complex, it's all strength related. Yes, you have some movements that are faster, like the last layer would be 60% for 6 reps at max speed. So that's more slanted toward strength speed, but it's still strength dominant. It's not a plyometric effect. And it's still the exact same movement pattern as the bench press. And anyway, when I'm warming up the incline press or the squat or whatever with the earlier sets, I have the intent to accelerate as much as possible. So I am warming up those fast velocities anyway. So what I do is that I will normally gradually ramp up with doubles or triples, whatever that I feel like today. I like doubles because I don't want to cause any fatigue for the complex. Although if I wanted to build a bit more muscle, I might go with triples or even up to 5 reps. But normally it's like doubles that are just gradually ramp up to roughly, I want to say 80, 85%. At what point I can start my first layer. But when you have the intent to accelerate, you turn on the nervous system as much as possible. So it's very quite simple. Same thing on the squat. Now, if I were to use a complex with 3 different exercises, that would be different. One might be like a strength movement, one might be a plyometric exercise, one might be a sports skill movement. Then you do need some preparation work for all 3. Just at least to grease the groove and not have that one set you do done on a suboptimal pattern activation that would lead to polluting your motor pattern.
Yeah, maybe that speaks to why French contrast, and that's what I wanted to get into a little bit today too. It's like French contrast is kind of stuck out, at least in my observation, from some of the other complex methods for speed and power athletes. And it's, if you think of it as a different program, the strength is a different program than the speed. Well, it's like within a French contrast, you have a strength that potentiates a speed, and then you get another version of that. So you get like a high force version of that pairing, like a heavy lift, and then a depth jump, and then you get a high speed force version of that pairing. So like a jump squat and a quick line hop or something like that. But it's interesting to think of that in light of some of the other complexes out there. And that's what I wanted to get into as well. It sounds like that Gunthor complex, that is a very, if I'm a shot putter, that's awesome. I need some size and strength, but maybe that complex wouldn't be ideal if I'm a 100-meter sprinter and I need more speed elements in there. And so I'll just kick this off a little bit open-ended with, French contrast. It's stuck out and it is extremely effective, but with the sensitization in mind, if I only do French contrast all year, eventually it'll be fun and challenging for the athlete's brain and nervous system to mix that up. So for you, alternatives or similar and favorable complexes in developing speed and power that may be other than French contrast?
Well, first, let's just backtrack a bit. I just want to finish my thoughts on because people will be get confused when I say that strength is not the foundation of power. I mean, it is to some extent. The main benefit of strength work, and strength work should only be general. Okay. Power work can be specific and probably should be specific at some point, but strength work is general because the main purpose of strength work for an athlete is simply to increase the capacity of the nervous system to send a strong activation drive to the muscles. That's all it is. It's just to be able for that central machine to send a signal, whatever that signal is. Okay. So you don't need to have a movement that is very specific to be effective for sport. And that's why some people will benefit from strength work if they have an inefficient nervous system, while others won't if they already have that very efficient central drive. Anyway, so
I love that, by the way. That's sorry to interrupt, but that's awesome. Just even think about the natural athlete, the person who didn't have to lift weights, could still sprint and jump. It's they just maybe had amazing drive. And from that pure general perspective, they already had it, but then all the specific skill, the power, they're getting through maybe playing or whatever they're doing. So sorry,
it's really just a way to give you the mechanics to be able to do the power work and speed work as efficiently as possible. Because without that strong drive, because explosive movements rely on fast twitch fibers, and you need to have those fast twitch fibers fire as fast as possible. And they are called high threshold motor units for a reason, because they have a very high activation threshold. They need a very strong neural signal to get activated. So if you don't have that capacity to send a strong neural drive, the fast twitch fibers will only come into play when the intermediate fibers are incapable of doing the work. Whereas someone with a very, very strong drive can almost recruit all those fibers simultaneously. So obviously it can be more powerful, more agile, more quicker, and all that stuff. So if you have that naturally, doing all the strength work in the world will not make you faster. It will make you stronger. So maybe in some phases of your sport where you need strength, it's going to help, but it's not going to contribute to making you faster. Okay. But not everybody is born with those advantages, and they do need the strength work, not so much because, well, if my legs are stronger, I'm going to sprint faster. No, your legs are plenty strong to run fast. Okay. You need that drive to be able to recruit those fast twitch fibers, and the strength work will give you that. But the cool thing is that it doesn't take long to get it. Okay. And once you have it, it lasts for 30 days. Mm-hmm. So you can actually not train strength for 30 days and you will maintain that neural drive. Your squat might go down because you're not practicing it, but you still have the neurological adaptations. And even then, you could just like touch up on some heavy lifting every 3 weeks and you would maintain or even improve your neural drive. So there's no the burden of doing constantly heavy work when your goal is simply to get faster and more powerful. Okay. Now, if you're playing football and you need to tackle someone, that's a different story. Mm-hmm. But for pure speed, that's the same thing. Now, if you want to use complexes strictly for speed, well, you need to include as many or as frequently exercises with either with a very fast contraction velocity, ideally matching the speed that you or the muscle contraction velocity you will be using in your sport, or maybe even doing over speed work, but certainly in that range, right? And if you want to use heavier work for speed work, it's only, as you mentioned, as a potentiation tool. You are using either, let's say, for example, super maximal lift. So maybe you're doing top half squats as the first exercise in your complex, just because it's going to get a stronger excitatory effect on the nervous system than just regular heavy lifting because you have more weight. You could use the overload eccentrics. You could use isometrics, just overcoming isometrics, pushing as hard or as you can on against an immovable object. For example, going in a power rack, putting the bar below the safety pins, squat, let's say 90-ish degrees in the angle and hip angle, and pushing as hard as humanly possible for 6 seconds. That does exactly what the heavy partial does when it comes to speed work. Okay. To me, if I'm building a complex and my goal for that complex is increasing power, because as you mentioned, building strength. Like the Gunthor complex is a strength complex. It has nothing to do with power, even though you are doing some reps fast. It's all about strength. And I actually question whether it was super efficient for Gunthor. I think most of his gain was probably more because when he was combining bench press squats with shot puts and all the plyometrics work he was doing. Probably the heavy complex he was doing, which he was doing only for 4 weeks, was simply to get that, well, that's probably not why he was doing it or what he thought he was doing it, but that was the actual effect. It was simply strengthening that neural drive because of all the various and very high tension contractions, right? So it was more of a general complex in my opinion. But so if you're using a complex to build strength and speed and power, okay, and then for me, a heavy lift, overload lift partial, and overcoming isometrics, the same thing. It's the same thing. It's redundant. So I wouldn't do both. I wouldn't do, like, let's say, heavy partials and full squats. I used that in the past. I don't do it anymore because now I have a better understanding. When I'm going for speed, then the high tension exercise serves only the purpose of amping up the nervous system for the following explosive exercise or exercises, right? So you could do overcoming one complex I really like, overcoming isometric 6 seconds all out, 90 degrees knee and hip angle, followed by a plyometer or a jump exercise. Could be a loaded jump squat, could be a vertical jump, or it could be both. I could be doing, for example, squat against spins, 6 seconds, 2 or 3 minutes rest because potentiation is at its highest at 2 or 3 minutes. Then trap bar jumps with 10% of your max squat, 2 or 3 minutes rest, vertical jump or depth jump. Okay. Or I could do, for example, in a power rack, overcoming isometrics deadlift or RDL. Okay. Then 2 or 3 minutes, I would do, let's say, power cleans. And then I would, with very lightweight, by the way. And I'm going to get back to Olympic lift afterwards. And then I would do broad jumps, for example, or hurdle jumps, or like any forward moving jumps. So I want to use the high tension work mostly for potentiation. And I really like the overcoming isometrics. First, because they're a lot less draining than the heavy work, than even partials or full range. So they will have less fatigue impact on the explosive movement, but they have pretty much the same potentiation. Okay, so that would be a very effective complex. Also requires a lot less warming up, which is a benefit for athletes who have a very low tolerance for volume, like sprinters, for example. Now, for the Olympic lifts, also I change the way I use them when I do complexes. If I'm doing a complex to build strength, a general complex, I just want a stronger neural drive or get stronger for, like, say, tackling in football, I'm going to use, by the way, I only use lifts from the hang, so power snatch from the hang, power clean from the hang, and only in the power position. There's no need to full squat. That's stupid with an athlete. Because first of all, that's too technical. Second, you reduce the height at which you're pulling the barbell, so you're producing less power, which is kind of the goal. And you all actually want to explode from the athletic position and catch a weight or absorb force in that same athletic position, which is not the full squat unless you're a catcher in baseball, right? So anyway, so the way I see it is completely different than when I see it for Olympic weightlifters. If you're an Olympic weightlifter, you need to just produce as much height as you need to get under the bar to be as efficient as possible and use your leg strength to stand back up. With athletes, I use power snatches from the hang and power cleans from the hang. But if an Olympic lifting coach was listening to the cues I was giving, he would throw something in my head. Because to me, it's not an Olympic lift. It just happens to look like a snatch or look like a power clean. My cue is jump with the freaking barbell, okay? And that you would never say that to an Olympic weightlifter because the trend is actually to shorten your pull to move faster under the bar. But with an athlete, you're using them as a form of ballistic exercise. To me, a power snatch for an athlete is a loaded jump, except that you can actually release the bar in the air. So you need to produce even more momentum. So that's the way I teach the Olympic lifts. I'm going to use a lot less weight. And I prefer the power snatch because a power clean is kind of hard to do with maximum explosion with light weights. The bar will go just way too high. Snatch, it works. So I would actually use very light weight for power snatches, maybe 55 to 65% in complexes aimed at building speed. Because the goal is not to get stronger. The goal is to get those muscles firing faster. If the barbell is moving at 1.2 meters per second, I'm not doing my job. I need to reach like 1.8, 1.9, 2 meters per second, something like that. So I want maximum velocity, so I'm using light loads with the cue of jumping. It's, to me, a ballistic movement. So the cue is, when trying to build speed, it's not complicated. You have one excitatory exercise at the beginning. Anything that requires a very high level of force production can be overcoming isometrics, can even be yielding isometrics or functional isometrics with heavy weights. If you want to see a weight move, it can be heavy partials, can be even a heavy lift, although that's my least favorite solution because of the higher need for warming up, higher risk of injury, and the higher fatigue. Then you will have one or two very fast movements. Now, these movements can be strength speed, which would be like the Olympic lift variations. It could be speed strength, which would be your jump squats with light weights, medicine ball throws, stuff like that, or even like weighted sprints, which only works for 20 meters or less, because higher than that, you don't have the proper position. It could be, if I'm doing a specific sport skill, it could be an overloaded golf swing, for example. Then I would have a third exercise, which could be even faster. So it could be a reactive movement, could be a sprint, could be an unloaded jumps, could be a depth jump. So the goal is really to have that high velocity zone potentiated by a max force movement. The max force movement is not a goal in itself. It's just a tool to get more out of the explosive movement. And that's the difference when you do a complex where your goal is to get stronger. Now the heavy movement can be used in combination. I could use a heavy partial with a full range lift. I could use an overcoming isometrics with a full range lift, or an overcoming isometrics with a partial lift, because my goal is to build strength. But if my goal is to build power, then I will need to focus on speed and only use that high tension movement to potentiate the nervous system.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a question in my question list to ask you about the overcoming isometrics in relation to the role in the complex. When I was at Cal, it was kind of like an 8-year evolution of starting with regular French contrast and then finding out ways to make this better. Not that it isn't great just as it is, but even as you said, just simple things
it's great, but every complex only works for roughly 4 weeks.
It can
However
be.
great it is, like neurological complex. You're going to get super fast result for 3 weeks. Then after that, it tops out. So even though it's great, you do need to change the stimulus if you are to progress. Because as I mentioned earlier, especially with the French contrast with 4 exercises, for example, you can't progress the stimulus by adding volume. Because the magnitude of the volume increase by adding only 1 set is like adding 4 sets. So that's way too much.
Yeah. And even just, starting in the fall with 2 and going to 3 was really helpful. And that was almost my progression. I didn't change like when working with athletes and doing that, I didn't change too many things, but they got a break. They also got to desensitize from the French contrast. I would start it like 6 weeks before a December meet, change some exercises up. They'd do their December meet. Then we'd just do bodybuilding stuff for a few weeks to kind of wash everything out and resensitize. Then we'd start it again in like mid-January and then do that till March. But even then, I will say I didn't do the overcoming isometrics with like the college group. I did that only with some of the pro swimmers. This being with the men's swim team. I did this stuff with track when I work with track. I've always felt like some of the other sports like tennis, I was like, tennis do they really need to do French contrast? Anyways, but I found that with some of the really experienced athletes making the switch to a functional, like we didn't have a force plate to measure like how hard are you pulling into the bar for that overloaded isometric. We just did. I think I got this idea from you, just loading the shit out of a bar and just lifting it up like an inch and that's it. And so we did that as our replacement for the overload. And I had some pro swimmers, like that year we did that, they were maxing out on all their power metrics, like Kaiser jump wattage, a vertical jump, all that stuff was higher than it had ever been. I think the reason I didn't keep using it with that population was I found that it actually that didn't correlate with their best swimming seasons, because I think it's because like, all right, well, great. Maybe you're a few hundreds faster off the block. That's awesome. But this is not your whole race, obviously. Like there's more specific skills. But I was like, well, in my corner in the weight room, I'm like, yes, you're more powerful on this than you've ever been. And yeah, maybe if it was a 50 sprinter, it would have been different. That was like, 100-meter athletes and 100, 200 athletes. So it's a little bit different.
And by the way, there would be a way to do French contrast with tennis and with golf and with baseball. For example, the first exercise would be an overcoming isometrics in a sport-specific position. So for example, in golf, you would hold the contact position or the impact position, let's say against the wall or something, or a resistance pulling you back for 6 seconds as hard as you can. Then you would do, for example, your regular swing. So you would hit maybe 3 balls. Then you could have overloaded swing. So a golf club with a few ounces more weight than a regular club. Then you could go with the over speed work, which is a specific stick that is 6% lighter that I use. And then you could finish with a reactive swing. You would have a resistance band attached to a post in front of you. So in your backswing, you have more tension, but it actually speeds yourself up in the downswing. So that could actually be used. It could be used.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I know you were doing we talked about your work with golf as well. Like for me, if I'm going to go out to the driving range and work on just swinging ability, I would absolutely keep that in mind. The only reason I joked about tennis was just because it was the nuances of tennis. For me, it was more the consistency of even seeing some of the athletes with all the playing they were doing wasn't necessarily there. So my concerns are more just basic strength and then injury prevention, like robustness. Like that's the reason I kind of chuckled. It would be cool maybe in the off season or something like that in that situation. But
because of the high volume of work they're already doing, it's kind of hard to do.
Yeah.
So maybe golf, it's more practical because they don't do as many physical work from like a cardiovascular or even change of direction that negatively impact the body's capacity to recover.
So yeah, just last question quickly, Christian, and I know we're running down on time, so I want to make this really fast. Is this most ascending versus descending? I know in your books and articles you've talked about, I think it's called like the Canadian descending method. And I almost wonder, is it even worth it to do ascending work? Like we usually think, we'll start with, and for a track practice, okay, we're going to start with speed and then we'll go in the weight room. And I get it. If your sprint practice drained you, you want to do the freshest thing first. But if I was thinking, well, if a few potentiation sets don't drain you, you know what I'm saying? So anyways, just in respect to time, thoughts of ascending versus descending type power.
Yeah, obviously the Canadian ascending descending system was invented like 25 years ago, 22 years ago. So I didn't have the knowledge I have now. So I thought it was cool to do a complex starting with a heavier work and then a complex starting with a lighter work, the faster work on different days. But you're right. When you understand the real purpose of each step in a complex, it doesn't do anything, because you really want to use the heavy work as potentiation rather than as a training tool itself, unless it's a strength complex. And in that case, there's no sense in doing ascending, descending, because you are training strength qualities. So I think that the complex will always be better if you use high force methods first, and use that to potentiate the high speed method. And never underestimate the value of resting between exercises. I think that one of the biggest drawbacks, or it's not a drawback, but of complexes, is the amount of adrenaline that they produce. Because of the complexity of combining several motor tasks in one task, then you need a lot more brain power. So your neuron needs to fire faster to increase more adrenaline. But what that does, when your adrenaline is high, you are in go, go, go mode, right? You don't feel the fatigue as much. You want to go right now. You're excited, you're amped up. And a lot of athletes will short-side themselves by resting 1 minute instead of 3 or even 4 minutes. Like potentiation after a heavy lift or a heavy or high tension method will peak at around 2 minutes. It's very high for 2 to 3 minutes and gradually get down at the 4 minutes mark. And at 5 minutes, there's still a residual effect. So the ideal rest period between station of a complex will be 2 to 4 minutes, especially between the heavy layer and the explosive work.
Yeah. Well, sounds good. Hey, I'm sure we could go so far down the ascending, descending, or continue to go down that rabbit hole as well. But the principles...
It's really underwhelming to only do 1 hour.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. It's my fault.
No worries. No worries at all. I mean, in the editing and the turnaround, it's I'm used to listening to these again and taking notes on them myself in 2 hours. I have like so many notes. I feel like I just took a class, but hey, 1 hour will be like, it'll be a mini class for me. So, hey, I appreciate any time I can get with you, Christian. And thank you so much for being on the show, talking about these complexes and these ideas, and always appreciate talking to you, man.
It was great, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode. If you enjoyed the show, you can help us out by leaving us a rating or review on Spotify, iTunes, whatever you're listening to the show on. Would totally appreciate that. And we'll see you guys next week with another great guest. Have a good one.